As Nicholas said, we have a promotion going about Cambridge exam. So we thought we'd give you some information, whether your students are going to be participating with MLA or not. I thought it'd be a great opportunity to give you a general introduction to Cambridge exams. Okay. As always, and particularly for this webinar, I think it's going to be important that all the information on these slides, and there is a lot of information here, is going to be in a webinar handout that will come out. You'll receive a link to it in an email tomorrow. If you don't receive that email, check your spam. It often goes there. And then if you don't get it, you can write to me at formazione@mlaworld.com. You'll also get a certificate of participation. Okay. As I said, don't worry too much if there's a lot of information on the screen during this webinar. I wanted to put it in there because I can talk about it, but it'll be in the handout afterwards as well. We're going to have to go through a lot of information here, so stick with me. We're going to have a look at the different exams. Anyway, Cambridge English exams are amongst the most recognized English language exams in the world. Okay, so we're talking about in Europe, I would say they're the most. I guess they're only challenged by some of the American ones, but they're generally just used in American, for example, American universities or American immigration. Okay. They cover the entire range of the Common European Framework for Reference of Languages, often known as the CEFR. These are the things that you can see on the right going from A1 to C2. I hope you're familiar with those because we'll be referring to those a bit. But basically, we have those starting very low at A1, which is, what we might have in the past called elementary, and going up to C2, which is pretty much fluent. Okay, I mean, these are if you've got a very high level of English. Okay. Um, we are going to be talking particularly today about 4 exams. Okay, the key for schools, preliminary for schools, first for schools, and C1 advanced. Okay, there are other exams, as you can see on the right. There are some ones that they call starters, movers, and flyers, and there is one very high up called proficiency. Okay, we're not going to be talking about those today, partly because we don't generally deal with them in MLA. Okay, but a lot of the sort of information that you'll get here will be valid for those anyway. Okay. You'll notice that there are these first 3 we have here, A2 key for schools, B1 preliminary for schools, and B2 first for schools, have this title for schools after. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about that later. First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about the objectives. Okay. I hope in this webinar you'll find out how to understand the formats of the different Cambridge English exams from Key A2 to Advanced C1. You should be able to appreciate the tasks in each part of the exam, but each part of each exam, okay? And understand the assessment criteria for speaking and writing the exams. I think this is quite important because even though you might have a student who has a guaranteed level of B1 or B2, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll pass at a high level or even pass at all in that exam if they're not familiar with the parts of the exam. Okay, and particularly speaking and writing, they might be able to write fine, they might be able to speak, have a conversation, but unless they really know what those tasks are and what they're expected to do and what they'll be graded on, then that's what that they'll maximize their score there. Okay, doesn't mean they're necessarily changing a level or something, but we're just expanding their skills and making sure we know that the exam is testing all different types of skills. It doesn't just mean you can speak for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, give a speech, but it means you can interact with someone. It doesn't just mean you can write a letter, but you can write an essay, you can write an article and things like this. So this is why the exams are so well regarded, that they test you in different aspects of the language. Okay. As I said, I want to deal with this schools or for schools. Okay, we have a little book here, quite a common book that, as you can see, it has for first and for first for schools. Okay, these three exams, the A2 key, the B1 preliminary, and the B2 first, come in two versions. That is the for schools version and the standard, or we might call it the not for schools. It's not called not for schools, but it's just called, for example, first, B2 first. Okay, what is the difference? Okay, as you might imagine, the schools ones are aimed at school students. Okay, however, they are the same level. Okay, and they lead to exactly the same certificate. So when your students receive a certificate, if they've done first for schools, or if you have older students that have done just the normal first and not for schools, okay, it won't be obvious from their certificate what they've done. Okay, which is important because the certificate indicates the level. Okay, it doesn't really indicate the content of the exam. Okay, and the content of the exam is not at a lower level for schools and a higher level in the other version. Okay, it just targets the experience, okay, and interests of school children. Okay, so if you have students in middle or high school, okay, which I imagine most people do, we in this webinar, the for school versions would be recommended. Okay. Now, look, I have some students who are 18, 19 years old, and sometimes they prefer to do the general version, the not for schools. Okay. But I think it's always better to recommend the first for schools or the for schools versions, okay, if they're available. Partly because the the not for schools versions might deal with things, for example, business, work, travel plans, university, study, things like that, that we wouldn't expect students to know about in their first language, let alone in English. Okay, so uh, the other difference is some of the, for example, the listening is usually conversations. At least one of the participants in the conversation will be a child. Okay, usually a teenager, not a young child, but they'll be talking about, free time activities, school, sports, things like that, things that interest the students that they would be familiar with. Whereas the not for school versions might have a bit more information about, work or plans or things like that, or travel arrangements that students might not really be so familiar with that sort of thing, how it works in their own language. Okay. Um, in this webinar, we're going to be looking at the for schools versions. However, C1 Advanced does not have a for schools version, as we're talking about C1 English here, so advanced English level. And really we can't really limit it to sort of school students. Also, I think most students doing advanced will be at least 16, 17 years old. Okay, and I would expect that they might be more interested in the adult versions, let's say. Okay, it doesn't mean students can't do the not for schools versions, and it doesn't mean adults can't do the for school versions. It's just an alternative. Okay. Moving on, let me tell you a little bit about the exams. All the exams test four English skills. Okay, the big four we talk about: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Okay, and they all have separate parts to deal with those. Okay, a student, as I said before, to really be able to measure your students' English correctly, it's really necessary for your students to have some sort of training in what they're going to be facing in the exam. Okay, the previous exams, starters, movers, and flyers, which are for children, that's not really so true. Okay, and you can give students sort of general English and then put them into the exam, and I would expect that they would be able to pass it without necessarily having a big familiarity with the exam. Once we move on to the key, the preliminary, the first advanced and proficiency, it's really going to be necessary. okay, that they know these, and ideally also the marking criteria. That is what the examiners are looking for. Each exam that is, for example, preliminary for schools, let's say, is actually made up of several smaller exams. Okay, and let's have a look at these. Okay, so for example, the A2 key has a reading and writing part. These are put together, okay, because writing is not emphasized as much because they're A2 level students, more or less sort of pre-intermediate students. It's not going to be as important. They have a limited writing part, so they put those two parts of the exam together. There's listening for 30 minutes and speaking for 8 to 10 minutes. You'll notice that the speaking parts of these exams are quite brief in respect to the others, obviously because speaking is a much more intensive skill. Okay, and in fact that speaking time, it's not as if they start the clock, you speak, and after 8 minutes they stop you. Okay, there's parts of that speaking exam that we'll look at later. Okay, and also the speaking exams are done generally with two students there, sometimes even with three. And so there's two students that occasionally have to speak directly to the examiner. Occasionally they have to speak to the other student, okay, or the other candidate, we might say. B1 preliminary, and this is true for preliminary for schools as well, the times are exactly the same. Okay, reading is 45 minutes. Writing is 45 minutes, so those parts are separated. Listening is 30 minutes, and speaking is 10 to 12 minutes. By the way, in all the listening exams, in all of these levels, everything they hear it's done on a recording, so they listen to something either on the computer or on a speaker in the exam room. It will always be repeated twice, so they'll always hear everything twice. There's nothing in the listening exams that you only hear once. Okay. B2 first, as you can see, these are getting slightly longer. Okay. Reading and use of English, we're talking about 75 minutes. Notice they have here use of English, which means that the reading has some exercises which are, long text with comprehension or matching or things like these. Other ones, they have shorter exercises. For example, you might need to transform one sentence into another sentence. Okay, so these are sort of what they might call use of English. Okay, your writing is much longer, 80 minutes, and that's actually divided into two parts. Okay, listening is about 40 minutes. They say about because the recording sometimes might be a minute more or a minute less. Okay, and the speaking goes for 14 minutes. Again, if they have three people in any of these speaking exams, they add on some minutes so everyone has a possibility to talk a bit, to have their turn. Okay. And in the C1 Advanced, the reading and use of English is now 90 minutes, writing 90 minutes, listening about 40 minutes, and speaking about 15 minutes. By the way, don't feel like you have to take notes. You'll be getting a handout with all this information on it. Okay, and that handout also involves a lot of links to give you even more detailed information, including some webinars that we've done on this particular parts of these exams before. As I said, the speaking exams are usually conducted with two candidates being the students when they're doing the exam. Okay, and if it's necessary to test three, they give a bit more time. Okay. Let's have a look at each exam in particular. As I said, I can't go into too many details because we've only got limited time here, but we'll have a look at a page at least on each exam. Okay, so what is the reading and writing exam? Without looking at every part of the reading and writing, it basically has 7 different parts made of 32 questions in total, and it's 50% of the total marks of the exam. So if you went really well in this, okay, you could a student could go much less well in the other parts and still pass the exam. They don't need to, and this is true for all the exams, you don't need to pass all parts of the exam. If you're weaker in listening, then you may be able to make that up in your speaking or in your reading and writing. General comprehension. So what are the questions in this part? There's sort of general comprehension of written texts. There's sometimes gap fill exercises, text with words missing, or sometimes a word missing that you have to choose from some alternatives. Sometimes a word missing that you actually just have to write a word in of your own choice. You have a short, for example, there's an example on the right here, a short 25 word or more written email based on a written prompt. So you have to reply, well, you have to write an email based on what the information you have to put in there. Okay. And a longer 35 words or more short story based on 3 picture prompts. Okay. Listening, okay, 5 parts, 25 questions, a quarter of the total marks. Okay. Listening to recorded monologues or dialogues. So, as I said, for schools, we're generally talking about conversations between young people, teenagers. Okay, it's not going to be using slang. It's going to be spoken quite clearly. It's not going to be necessarily a lot slower than natural speech, but it will be clear, and the sentences will be full. Let's say they won't be broken up. It won't have slang and things like that. Okay. And it also has some matching visual information. So it might have 3 pictures, a picture of, I don't know, a telephone, a set of keys, a wallet. And then the 2 people are talking about, what they found in their bag. Okay? And you have to choose whether it's the wallet, the keys, the things like that. Okay. And there's some others with written answers, and there's also gap fills there too. So you have people talking about something, and then the students have to write in the information. So, for example, if they say, the film starts at 8 p.m., the student might have to write 8 o'clock, 8 p.m., whatever it is. Okay. Then we go on to speaking. Okay, it's in 2 parts, 25% of total marks. Okay, generally they start out, and this is true for all these exams we're going to be talking about today. The first part of the spoken exam is a sort of general questions from the examiner to the candidate about their family, friends, studies, leisure, home life, the sort of things that you would expect students to be able to respond to at these appropriate levels. Okay. And then they have a task, have a mix of short and longer answers. Okay. Then they have to speak to each other. Again, this is the interaction between 2 candidates. Okay, based on a visual prompt with some follow-up questions from the examiner. As I said, I don't have enough time to go through in detail, but in the handout, I've included a lot of information about these exams, links to the things, videos, and other things that you can look at. Okay, it's a lot of information in Italian too. If you're a group leader or a teacher who needs to explain this to parents, there's a lot of information also in Italian that you can give to the parents. Okay. Moving on to the B1 preliminary for schools. Okay. It has 6 parts, 32 questions. Sorry, the reading part has 6 parts, 32 questions, and here we're talking about 25% of total marks. Okay. Again, general comprehension of written text, gap fill exercises. Okay. We have the writing part, which again is divided into 2. Okay. 2 questions, 25%. The first one, you have to write about 100 words responding to an email, including several points provided. There's an example on the right. If you can't see that so clearly, if you're on a small device, don't worry too much. You can, if you Google B1 preliminary writing, I'm sure you'll get lots of examples. Okay. There is a lot of free information on the web about all these exams. So as I said, I've included a lot of websites in the handout, but Google, YouTube, these things are your friend too. Okay. So you basically receive this email and you have to write something back. It says about 100 words. I would recommend at least 90, not more than, let's say, 120. Okay. Those little notes on the side are things that you must include in. So, for example, where it says me too, okay, I enjoyed talking to you earlier and getting your news. Me too. That means in the student's email, they must say something about, yeah, it was great speaking to you too. I really enjoyed it. Doesn't mean they have to include those words. It just means that that sentiment or that idea has to be included. Okay. They're giving you a bit of help there with those notes. Okay. And then the second part, they have to write either a story or an article, again, about 100 words based on the prompts given. Okay. They get to choose here in the schools. They can either do a story or an article. I would recommend that as someone who trains students, you would get them to be very experienced in both a story or an article so that they can choose what they prefer on the day. Okay. Um, the someone asked about the word count. The word counts are 100 words. It says about. Okay. They will penalize you if you don't do enough. So if I would say if you're doing less than 80, first of all, it's going to be hard to answer these questions in considerably less than the word count to include everything they want. And similarly, if you go over, first of all, it's going to be difficult to go over the word count excessively because of the time limit, but it also is you're going to have to repeat or put in unnecessary detail, and they're looking for precision. Okay? I mean, if we're talking about A2 or B1, we're not talking about extremely high levels of English, so there's a bit of forgiveness there. Okay. Someone asked about contractions too. I don't think the genitives count as two, but I think contractions count as two words. So whether you did do not or don't, I think it counts the same. Okay. I wouldn't worry too much about that because those sort of things I think they're not going to be too strict about, given that they're saying about. Okay. And even in B2 and C1, when they have much more of it says a strict number, in my experience, they're not as strict about those, but it's really important to get your students practice to write that sort of length, okay? Because this is one of the things that I said, if they're not familiar with the task, they may just write on, they may not order their things. Ordering is really important, okay? Anyway, moving on to listening, okay? 4 parts, 25 questions, 25% of total marks, okay? Again, listening to recorded monologues or dialogues, matching visual written information, gap fills. Again, very similar to what we had at the A2, although obviously at a slightly higher level. Okay. Speaking, he'll, and this carries on into the next 2 exams as well. The speaking is broken into 4 parts. Again, 25%. So we got here, each exam is divided into, well, each part of these, the reading exam, the writing exam, listening exam, the speaking exam, are all equal. Okay. Remember, as I said, you don't necessarily have to pass every part. Okay. If you go worse in one, as long as you go better in the other, you'll still you can still pass the exam. Okay. These are generally just to let you know, with these exams, the everything apart from the speaking is done on one day. Okay. The speaking could be done on the same day as the other parts, or it could be done on a separate day. To be honest, it sort of depends on how many students at that center are sitting the exams. If they've got 10 students, I'm sure they could fit it in after the reading, writing, and listening. If they might have 80, for example, they might need to go throughout 2 days. So you might go in for the reading, writing, and listening exams, and you have a break between them. Okay, so you have that the time, and then you have a break, and then you come back and do the writing, and then you come back and do the listening. But the speaking, you might have to stay around a bit in the afternoon, or you might come back on a different day. Okay. Anyway, coming back to this speaking, again, it starts out with some general questions from the examiner to the candidate about family, friends, studies, leisure, home life, etc. They should answer with a mix of short and longer answers. When I say a mix, obviously, yes, I do is not really sufficient, but it doesn't mean that they have to digress on a lot. I usually try to tell my students that between 2 and 3 sentences answer is probably enough. Okay, you don't need to digress and go back on. If they ask you about, what's your favorite food, I encourage my students to answer that question and then maybe tell them a little bit about how often you eat it or what foods you don't like. But you don't need to go through everything you eat and your preferences from 1 to 10. Okay. If you stop there, they will ask you another question, and that's not a problem. Okay. And it might even be better because, moving on to another topic, you can show some different vocabulary expressions. Okay. You have an individual longer term. Okay. Here in B1, they give you a color photo to one candidate, and that person has to talk about it, describe it for about 1 minute. Okay. They give a different picture to the other student. Okay. And they'll have to do the same thing. Okay. And then the two, or very rarely, three candidates have to speak together about a topic based on a visual prompt. Okay. In this case, they often give you, for example, they describe a situation. They might say, there are some students going on a school trip to, or need to decide where to go for a school trip. Okay. Here are the students, they have a picture, and these are the possibilities. Now, the pictures will show things, for example, the cinema, the beach, a walk in the forest, museum, I don't know, shopping, okay, a play, okay. And these sort of things the students have to talk together about. Well, I think it's a good idea for them to go to a museum, okay, or I think shopping might be more interesting for them, blah, blah, blah. And that's the sort of thing that they talk together with. In this case, the examiner sort of takes a bit more of a backseat and just listens, okay. And then there'll be some follow-up questions based on the topic of the previous part. So if that speaking part was about that sort of school trip, okay, the examiner might ask some questions about, do you think it's important for students to go on school trips? Or, do you think students I don't know, spend too much time shopping? Okay. Things like that. They're not exactly the same as the general questions at the beginning because they're not so much questions about the student's experience, when was the last time you went shopping? They're more questions about opinions, do you think students should spend more time at museums, etc. Okay, and this is sort of similar in the B2, you'll see. Moving on to the first for schools. Okay. Here we have reading and use of English. Okay, so here we have reading and use of English is 7 parts, 52 questions, and 40% of total marks. So here is the most important part of this exam, or the one at least in terms of the marks. Okay, and what that means is we have some texts, bulks of text that you have to write answer comprehension questions or match things. Okay. But the use of English, and it's integrated, they're not really necessary one part reading, one part use of English, but things where a bit more you might need to transform words, transform sentences, gap fills, but you need to change the word, etc. Okay. Again, I can't go into a lot of detail here, but we have covered this in some previous webinars, and we're going to do some other webinars on it during the year. Okay. General comprehension of written text, gap fill exercises, sentence transformation exercises. These sentence transformation ones can be quite difficult, okay, but you do sort of recognize some patterns. Things like going from active to passive, going from direct speech to reported speech, going from standard verbs to phrasal verbs. These sort of things are indicative to conditionals, things like this. Okay, one moment. Going on to the writing, 2 parts, 2 questions, and 20% of total marks. First part, you have to write an essay. So all students have to write an essay. Okay. The word count is 140 to 190 words. Okay. Generally, I see this as 4 or 5 paragraphs. Okay. Introduction, 2 or 3 paragraphs in the middle, and a conclusion. Okay. You have the topic. It's generally an essay on do you agree or what do you think? Okay. And they give you 2 of these points, and you have to come up also with another third point. Okay. This is really something where it's necessary for students to be familiar with writing essays, because in my experience, students haven't covered essay writing that much in Italian schools, in Italian, let alone English. Okay, I know when I was at school in Australia, we covered essay writing in our own language a lot because we had to write these a lot. Okay, um, and then you have to write an article, or an email letter, or an essay, or a review. Now, in this second part, you have a choice. Okay. So you get, I think, 4 choices. Okay. And these are made up of, it could be an article, it could be an email, an essay, it could be an letter, sorry, essay or a review. Okay. In fact, in the first for schools, I think there's also the story. Okay. I'm not sure why I left that out. And again, the same word count. I generally, given that this is 80 minutes, I generally tell students spend 40 minutes on the first part, 40 minutes on the other part. Okay? And again, in my classes and in the classes that we're doing with MLA, you also see how we even divide that time up. Okay? Listening, okay, is 4 parts, 30 questions, 20% of total marks. Okay. Listening, again, monologues, dialogues, matching written information, gap fills. We don't have any visual information here in the sense we don't have pictures anymore. Okay. And speaking, okay, 4 parts. Okay, very similar to what we looked at before, okay, but a bit more. Okay, general questions at the beginning. Okay, again, they're going to be general questions, but they're still going to be expecting sort of B2 level answer. Okay, and same in C1. So the questions could even be the same. What do you like doing in your free time? In key, okay, it's going to be in the A2 key, it's going to be expected, quite a simple answer. In B2 or C1, it could be a lot more complex, and so they don't necessarily require that, but it's better if you can put it in. Okay. However, in a certain extent, that first part of speaking is a little bit of a warm up. Get the students comfortable, give them some questions that they know that they can answer before they get into things that are a little bit more challenging. Obviously, I think there's a lot of range for students to get some easy points by answering in a sort of more advanced way, even the simple questions. We'll go into that a little later in the year in our speaking exams webinar, and there's also on our YouTube page. There's an old one of those we have archived. So if you're interested in particular parts of the exam, particularly about B1 and B2, have a look at some of our webinars on our YouTube page. It's linked in the handout. Next part, the second part is the individual long term. Very similar to the B1, they have to compare and contrast, but here they have 2 pictures, okay, and a question, okay. So give you an example, it might be, for example, I don't know, a couple shopping in a supermarket and a young kid shopping in a clothes shop, okay, and it says, what do you think how do you think the people have feel about shopping in these places, or why do you think they're shopping? Okay, there's no particular correct answer to this. Okay, they just want to hear the student talk. Okay, they must speak for 1 minute, and it's not a problem if they don't finish. Okay, the examiner can cut them off. Okay, it'll be followed by a 30-second follow-up question, but for the other candidate. So if one person's answered that question, they might say to the other candidate, which one of these 2 places would you prefer to go shopping? Okay? And they just have to answer for 30 seconds. And then the other candidate gets 2 different pictures, and a follow-up question will be back to the other one. Again, in 3, it works a similar way, but in three. Okay, three students, I mean. And then the next part is an interesting part where they have to talk about a topic for 3 minutes. It's generally divided into 2 minutes plus 1 minute. I'll explain how. They give you very similar to the B1, except it's not pictures. They might have things, for example, one example I remember is what it says in the middle. What are some things that are important when choosing a job? And it has, maybe this is not so much for schools, but for general first, where it is located, the pay, the tasks you have to do, the hours. Okay, usually about 5 or 6 things, and the students have to talk for 2 minutes about all these different topics. They don't necessarily have to cover them all, but I would recommend that they cover most of them. Okay, having a conversation, agreeing and disagreeing together, and then after 2 minutes, the examiner interrupts them and just says, "Now I'd like you to speak for 1 minute about which one you think is the most important." Usually it's the most important, could be the least important, could be the two most important or least important. And the students are expected to come to some sort of conclusion on that. Not, they don't necessarily need to agree, okay, but they need to choose one or two and justify. Okay. And then some follow-up opinion questions, again, on the topic of that third part. So if that was about which things are important for jobs, they could say things like, what do you think it's more, let me see, do you think pay is the only important thing? Well, do you think that people are asked to work hours that are too long? Okay, things like that. Again, opinion questions rather than personal experience questions. Okay, and again, in this part, they encourage the students to talk together as well. The last exam we're going to be looking at today is the C1 Advanced, and this doesn't have a 4 schools version, okay, as I said before. Okay. Reading and use of English, okay, 8 parts, 56 questions, 40% of total marks. Again, general comprehension of written text, gap fill exercises, sentence transformations, things like this. Okay. They have also what they call multiple matching, where you have to match one opinion to a short sentence or whatever it is, or sometimes they have also paragraph gap fill, so you have an article with some paragraphs removed. Okay. Writing is in 2 parts again. Okay, here it's a bit longer. Instead of 80 minutes, it's 90 minutes. Okay, 2 questions, 20% of total marks. Very similar to what we had before. Okay, it's an essay, longer word limit. Okay, not much longer time. Okay, so it's only really 5 minutes. Well, it's 10 minutes in total, but if you divide that by 2, it's only 5 minutes longer than the B2, but it's a lot more words. But again, we're expecting the students to be at a higher level. Okay. And then they have, again, you have some opinions expressed, and you have 3 a question, 3 points. You have to choose 2 of those and say which one you think is the most important. Usually it is. Okay. Again, I won't go too deep into those. We've got webinars coming up and webinars in the past about writing exams, okay, and lots of advice about that. Okay. And then again, the second part of the writing is a choice. Okay, you can choose between a letter and email, proposal, report, or a review. Okay, not all of those are always available, but some of those are guaranteed. Okay, and again, the same word limit. Okay? Again, it's very important that the students are aware of what writing a proposal means, what they expect to find in a report or a review. Okay, it's I wouldn't expect students necessarily without training to know what a report entails. Okay, these are also what's very important at particularly B2 and even more at C1 level. Okay, is the register. So a report is going to, and the proposal, going to be much more formal than something like a review. And a letter could be formal or informal, depending on who it's to. If it's someone you don't know, it'd be a lot more formal. If it's to a friend, be a lot less formal. And, you know, formal English and informal English, I would say in many ways, informal English presents a lot of struggles to Italian students because I often find that Italian translated even in semi-informal Italian often translates directly into more formal English. Okay, so if students are using Italian style words, it often comes out sounding very formal. Okay, so again, these sort of things are quite important that you can indicate the formality. If you're going for something very formal or informal, there's ways of doing that. Okay. Moving back into the listening, 4 parts, 30 questions, 20% of total marks. Okay. Again, similar sort of things, monologues, dialogues, matching written information, gap fills. Okay. A bit more complex things, a bit more necessity to listen to pick up details specifically that are only mentioned once, or maybe even getting the gist of something that is not necessarily expressly said. Okay, same in the reading too. Okay, in the speaking, again, very similar to the previous part. Okay, previous exam B2. Okay, again, starts off with some general questions, an individual longer turn. Here, instead of 2 pictures, you have 3 pictures, but the examiner, you only need to talk about 2 of them. So you get the option of 3, but talk about 2 of them. Okay. They must speak for 1 minute. Okay, and again, a 30-second follow-up for the other candidate. The speaking is, we have the last part of the speaking, sorry, is the 2 or 3 candidates talk again about that topic from part 3. Okay. And then oh, sorry, that's, I beg your pardon, they speak together about that. Okay. And then some follow-up questions. Okay, again, you'll see that the exams at C1 and B2 are very similar in a lot of ways. Obviously much more demanding the C1, but if a student has done the B2 exam, they'll be familiar with a lot of the tasks. Okay, so won't they should be able to understand, an essay, what an essay involves. Obviously, the essay is structured a little bit differently. They're really only talking about 2 different points rather than 3. Okay, but they might be a lot more familiar. Okay. Anyway, just coming up to a bit more general speaking. Talking about the speaking exams, as you can see in the picture, there's going to be, in general, 2 students involved. We have 2 examiners. One of them is the person who's speaking, okay, who interacts with the students. There's another one who sits a bit back and doesn't interact, okay. It's just partly so that the person who's not interacting has a bit more maybe concentration, and also so that they can also be a bit more, well, they can talk about it together and maybe come up with if one examiner thinks they're a bit higher and the other thinks they're lower, they'll give them the sort of medium range. Okay. To talk about the things that are valued is the skills that are considered. Obviously, grammar and vocabulary at all levels and pronunciation at all levels. Obviously, you don't necessarily need to be correct with grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation at all moments. Okay, it gets more important as you go up the levels, but there's a certain tolerance for errors there. Okay, and in different parts, they expect, more errors if you're speaking a bit faster or you're making a more difficult point. However, it's important students understand that there are some skills that they might not realize. Okay, for example, the observing examiner gives you a global achievement mark. Okay, what is that? It's sort of, how did the student express the topic and their opinions in general? Okay, then we have interactive communication. This is the ability for the students to keep a conversation going without necessarily relying on the examiner. Okay. Discourse management, that's particularly, for example, where the students have to talk for the 1 minute by themselves. Okay. Can they do that without long breaks, without repetition, hesitation, or, it depends on the level. They can do a certain bit of repetition or hesitation at lower levels. Okay. Can they use discourse markers, things like well, or as I was saying, okay, these sort of things. Okay. These sort of things, as you can see, at certain levels. Okay. I've put them in brackets there. Also at C1 level, grammar and vocabulary separates out to grammar resource and lexical resource. What this means that the general mark of speaking will be divided up. Now, you don't see that when you get your results, but because you see the mark for speaking, but that mark is based on those, and it obviously makes it a little bit more reliable to know that they're not just going, I don't know, I think that was a 7 out of 10. Okay. They're giving you marks out of 5 or marks out of 10 for each of these different things. Okay. What this means, as I keep repeating, okay, as with writing exams, it's not enough to just enroll a student into a Cambridge exam. They really need to practice in real exam conditions using the real materials. So you're going to have to do a lot of mock exams with students, speaking exams. It doesn't necessarily need to be the full speaking exam in one moment, okay? But or the say a full writing exam, but it really does mean that they need to be familiar with what they're doing, relaxed. They can understand what the examiner is listening for. And writing exams, as with speaking, okay, it uses several criteria. Okay, grammar and vocabulary are not the only things they're looking for. Again, students seem to think that they are, but they're not. Okay, without going into too much detail, they're looking at the content. Okay, that is, did the student answer the question? Did they cover all the points? Okay. Did they not include anything that's spend too much time talking about things that weren't asked for? Okay. Is it organized? Does it have an introduction if it's an essay? Okay. Um, is it in logical order? Okay. If it's a story, does it have a beginning, middle, and end? Okay. Communicative achievement. Okay. That is, does an essay look like an essay? Okay, sound like an essay? Is it clear if I put this in front of someone that this is an essay or an email? Okay, even without looking at the question. In some senses, would someone be able to understand what the question was if they just had the answer of the students? Okay, is the register appropriate too? Again, it's important that they are familiar with this. Okay. As I said, we've done this in a few webinars, okay, and we're going to be doing a few more webinars again. So stay tuned if you really need some information about these things, speaking, writing. We've done ones at all parts of the exams, okay. Just some final information about results, okay. You might be wondering how the results are calculated. 5 to 10 days after your exam, okay, you receive a statement of results. Usually comes in an email. Okay, it'll show your level in each part of the exam and your overall score, and what that corresponds to is CFR level. So as you can see, those are the things in red there, and you can see in each band. Okay, here we have someone who sat the advanced exam, the C1. Okay, so we have 5 different parts of the exam. We have the score that they got of each part. We have the overall score, and we have what that corresponds to. You can pass at different grades. You can see, if you can see my arrow here, you have grade A, grade B, grade C, grade D. Okay, if you pass at grade A in any one of these exams, you actually receive a certificate indicating the next level up. Okay, so if your marks overall indicated that you were in grade A, you will receive a certificate that indicates that you are at C2 level, even though you did the C1 advanced, okay, and corresponding for other exams as well, okay. Similarly, if you don't make the grade that the exam is of, so for example, if this student who did the advanced exam, C1 advanced, failed by a couple of points, they would receive a certificate saying that they have the B2 level. Now, this is not what they're aiming for, and obviously, if the student has already done the B2, then it's not much use having a B2 again. But at least it indicates that you did get some achievement. Okay? Um, Obviously, if you get grade B or grade C, that means you get a certificate. Okay. Again, it doesn't that really doesn't matter too much whether it's grade B or grade C. Okay, except maybe for the teachers to know the strength and how strong they are. Also about going forwards, if this student is at grade B, then they might be ready to start proceeding with the next exam level. If they're at grade C, maybe we're not so sure, they might need a bit of revision before they pass on to the next level. Okay. Then you get to the examining school, the place where you sat the exam. They will send a certificate, okay, which is the one that you can frame or show employers or schools. Okay. Usually schools accept the statement of results too, so 5 to 10 days is all you need really for those. Okay. By the way, the certificate doesn't tell people whether you did the schools or not, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay. Um, just to finish, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about one of the motives for us to be talking about Cambridge exams today. Okay, as many people here, just looking at the participants' names, I recognize many names here of some of our MLA group leaders. And as you're probably aware, that our Get Ready General English online courses, that is for anyone who books in one of our UK or Ireland centres, now has the option of transforming Cambridge English, the general English task-based learning courses into Cambridge exam preparation courses at no extra cost. Okay, and this is the sort of information that we're going to be giving students to make them familiar with the tasks in the exam, the format of the exam, the duration, things like that. Obviously, not as I presented it today, but by doing the exercises. Okay. They'll get up to 25 weeks if they book by the 21st of October. Okay. And these are 1 hour weekly in groups with trained, experienced mother tongue teachers. Okay. Completely free if you're booking one of our summer courses. They will also get access to Cambridge University ebooks, so they'll get their own ebook, okay, platform, which is the test and train, okay, and the weekly lessons, okay. So they'll be assigned homework, and they'll have mock tests going on. They'll be able to see their results and even look at what they've done in previous. Even in their classes they've missed, they can even see the if they miss classes, okay, they can see the books that the pages of the books that they missed. Okay, they will also include personalized feedback. Okay, now just coming up as a conclusion, please be aware that there's a lot of free information. Okay, that it's in Cambridge's interest to distribute this information. So there's lots of documents, videos, podcasts, websites that give you information. If you go to cambridgeenglish.org, okay, you'll find a lot of information. They really give out, I mean, you can buy a lot of information as well, but a lot of the stuff on the website is free and any questions can be answered there. Okay. Just be careful that Cambridge updates its exams every few years. I think the last update was of the advanced. So be a little careful if you've got books that are a little bit older. They may include some tasks that are no longer relevant. A lot of it may still be relevant, but some of for example, the first certificate, if you get books more than about 10 years old, they include a letter which is no longer in there. Okay. So just be a little careful. Obviously, in our courses, we're using the most up-to-date information. Okay. And we're going to be talking a lot more about Cambridge exams in the near future, so watch this space. Okay. Please let me know in the chat if you have ideas for future webinars or there's any specific information that we covered today that you'd like to go us to go into in more depth. Okay. Thanks for your attention. As I said, all the information's on a handout and you'll receive a certificate of participation. It should go out tomorrow. Check your spam folder if you don't have it by tomorrow evening. Okay. Next webinar, next week, we're going to be taking a break from Cambridge and talking about autumn in the English classroom, talking a little bit about things like Thanksgiving. We're going to be talking about Diwali. We're going to be talking about even some literature. So please join us again next week. I'd love to see you there. Okay. Thanks again for all your attention, and I hope to see you next week. Okay. Bye, everyone.